I'm currently switching back and forth between two games, Balatro and Hollow Knight. Though remarkably different from one another, they both have the very particular ability to make hours of my life disappear without my notice. There is a lot going on in each of these games. I could talk about Balatro's fast-paced runs and powerful synergies, or Hollow Knight's combat and world design. But what jumps out to me most with these games is their... Maybe it's a product of my age, the steadily shrinking period of time I have to devote to video games, or my increasingly demanding and critical eye. But I'm finding that I lose myself in games less than I used to. It's a weird feeling losing yourself in a game rather than simply enjoying it. It's like every single part of the game's design, mechanics, visuals, sound, all come together to pull you into the world. You don't see the seams in the game's design, and it all just feels complete, real, and believable. Atmosphere is crucial to this feeling. It's that unspoken thing that hangs in the air around the game, the vibe it's trying to create, the feelings it wants you to sit in. When you start up a game and just feel its atmosphere, it's like the game designers are making their pitch to you. This is our game. Not every game needs to be incredibly atmospheric. I love it when they are, but there are games that I like that don't speak to me on that level. Dead Cells, for example, is a twitchy, exciting roguelike with well-designed gameplay systems and some of the flowiest combat around. But everything else about the game didn't do it for me. It's visually exciting, the music sounds good, but it doesn't really come together in a meaningful way for me. It does lead me to wonder what specifically goes into building this kind of atmosphere. What tricks are the devs using to make it work? And what about these games appeals to me in particular? When you boot up Hollow Knight, well, you can feel it. Even just the title screen feels so real. It doesn't feel gamey or that it's pandering to you. It just feels like something that is whole and complete in itself. That illusion is so important for Hollow Knight as a game. It's a game about exploring the ruined kingdom of Hallownest, and having that area feel believable and consistent makes the prospect of spending tens of hours wandering through it all the more interesting. Hollow Knight's exploration only works insofar as you find the world interesting. It's not that it feels realistic in the conventional sense, it's that it feels logically and internally consistent, something that could be real in another world. And that's really what the game wants to make you feel, like it's another world. This kind of stuff is practically written into the Metroidvania Bible. In part, I think because it was so important to both Metroid and Castlevania. They're both incredibly atmospheric games, with really well-designed worlds and a very well-developed sense of place. But I also just think that any game that is focused on exploring benefits from making that world feel real and lived in. It's more fun when you're curious about that world. One important facet of this atmosphere is simply how the game sounds. I don't know what kind of magic Christopher Larkin put into the soundtrack, but it just rips. Like, it's some of the best music in any game. It is so well suited to the gloomy, abandoned vibe of Hallownest. The Crossroads manages to sound both mournful and like the start of an epic adventure. I can't imagine a track better pitched to the start of an adventure like Hollow Knight. This soundtrack is destined to haunt my D&D playlists forever. It's just incredible. Other, more musically talented people have made videos delving into the music theory at play here, really breaking down what's going on, because there is a lot to this soundtrack. But yes, one of the keys to getting a good atmosphere in your game is to get an incredibly talented wizard of a composer who can perfectly match the vibe you're going for. The other thing that I found interesting about Hollow Knight are the sound effects. Notice how loud they are, the thumps of the sword strikes, the footsteps echoing in the room. I don't think this is as simple as loud sound effect is good, but in Hollow Knight's case, the sound effects really contribute to developing the sense of place for Hallownest. If you're trying to establish a sense of place in a written work, one of the most common tips is to use your character's senses, or to describe that place in relation to your character. In a game, you obviously can't make the player smell something, but you can use sound effects purposefully to put the player in the character's shoes, and provide a sense of what the environment is like. This kind of thing is all over Hollow Knight. The noises of other characters or hazards contribute to this well-developed world. It's a small touch, but the amount of destructible objects in the environments also adds to this. Both the sound and feeling of crunching through random background elements is both massively satisfying and just makes that world feel a little bit more lived in. And you will notice that the footsteps sound different depending on where you are. If you're in Green Path walking on leaves, it will sound that way. Whereas if you end up in a stag station or the crossroads, it kind of thumps on stone a bit more. These sound effects also have implications for your gameplay. They can warn you of hazards, they can frighten you, or they can provide you with one of the most intense feelings of relief that I've felt in a game. The other thing that's pretty obvious when you play Hollow Knight is the lack of conventional menu or UI elements. Your map is actually a map, which you have to buy. You buy your pins as well, and the tutorials are all written in this kind of in-universe style language. This isn't the way that things should be with everything. Hell, imagine Tetris trying a similar thing for its tutorial. But for Hollow Knight, I do think that it's the right call. There's obviously a great deal of debate about this from a game design perspective. Is it fun to buy your map, or is it just annoying? But I do think that in Hollow Knight's case, it does really add to the game's atmosphere, and it very much suits the style of game that it is. Interestingly, I think Hollow Knight shows some fairly reasonable restraint in this area. Though it delivers its tutorials in this in-universe style language, it does still show you regular button prompts. You get a normal health bar, though it is quite beautifully designed to fit the style of the rest of the game. Everyone has a different view on exactly how much a game should break from the fiction, how much it should let you know that it's a game, but I think that Hollow Knight strikes a good balance, at least for my sensibilities and preferences. Outside of all these quite technical design choices, there are a lot of things in Hollow Knight, more so with its narrative and world design, that also contribute to this kind of immersion. The most notable and talked about example is the logical consistency of its world design. I won't be the first person to point this out, but the Blue Lake is located above the rainy City of Tears, implying that that is the source of that area's perpetual rain, and then naturally the royal waterways are below the City of Tears, providing drainage for all of that water. It's just very well thought out, and being able to see these little connections between different areas does make the world feel more real. This also goes for the environmental and enemy design. All of these are really distinct and give the sense of small ecosystems, which develops all of that kind of atmosphere and sense of place as individual locations within the world. Alongside these small touches of realism is the game's narrative. Everything about Hollow Knight feels lived in. Buildings and rooms are purposeful, places appear to have history, and all of it is delivered in these delightfully vague chunks of lore. It gives you the real sense that there's something going on here. Tablets with text inscriptions, along with lore and the designs of each place, suggests it a history beyond what you can immediately understand. This more vague approach to storytelling leaves the player with the feeling that there is so much to know. Hollow Knight's lore isn't massively complicated, but the manner in which it's delivered helps contribute to this kind of melancholy atmosphere. You're piecing together the fragments of a fallen kingdom. Once again, this isn't universally good design. Other games build an atmosphere around extensive dialogue and direct storytelling. Disco Elysium makes for a great example of a game that builds a really strong sense of place by filling that place with interesting people who have interesting lives and have interesting things to say. The idea of developing this atmosphere through narrative and character isn't one size fits all. What the Hollow Knight devs did well is they looked at the kind of game they were making, a Metroidvania, so typically exploration heavy and narrative light, and they used the tools at their disposal to fill that world out. In an RPG, you'd have a lot more leeway to build out the vibes and atmosphere of a world through dialogue, but it's not really the case with a Metroidvania. Everything about Hollow Knight contributes to building up Hallownest as a place, which is all the more important for making an interesting game world. The atmosphere of Hollow Knight is critical for its narrative and style, because Hollow Knight wants you to sink into its world. It wants you to suspend your disbelief and view Hallownest as though it could be a real place. The delight of this atmospheric experience honestly turns my critical brain off in a lot of ways. I'm not always thinking about the logic of the world design or the pacing of the game because I'm so overwhelmed by how sure-footed and stylish Hollow Knight's world is. Hollow Knight showcases how this kind of atmosphere is relevant for developing a sense of place and contributing to a game's world building, but atmosphere isn't always used in this way. Hollow Knight is a very exploration-driven game. It's very focused on environmental storytelling and a sense of discovery. Its atmosphere works toward that end, but not every game is designed that way. Case in point. Everyone who has played Balatro has had a moment where they felt like they descended into some bizarre liminal space. This game has no overt narrative, no world building, no exploration, but the vibes. They are honestly something else. Despite having a very different end goal to Hollow Knight, Balatro is using a lot of the same tricks to conjure its atmosphere. Balatro feels like poker gone mad. It's a game about crazy and powerful synergies, crazy high numbers, and pushing your luck. It takes something very rigid and simple, a deck of cards and a set of scores associated with particular poker hands, and it lets you take it to crazy heights. The game's music is built to suit this wacky, off-kilter vibe. The main theme is in 7/8, which is a non-standard time signature, and it gives the music this kind of like lilting off-kilter feeling. That backing synth also just wobbles through, shifting its speed so that it doesn't quite line up with the tempo of the rest of the track. It all contributes to this spacey vibe that it's going for. It wants you to lose yourself, to fall into the game and feel like everything is going mad. It's helped along by the steady power escalation of the game that really makes you feel like everything is flying off the rails. And that's before we even talk about the sound effects. Playing Balatro feels a bit like ramming your head into a burning, faulty slot machine. It pings and boops and ka-chings, and that flame sound is just one of the best things that I've heard in a game. Naturally, as the game escalates, it speeds these sound effects up a little, leading to an overwhelming flurry of noises as your perfectly planned strategy just comes off in the late game. Balatro also has a razor focus on what's important to its atmosphere. The blinds are named but don't have any other art or lore associated with them. Balatro is so built around this feeling of spacey weirdness that I don't even know what these blinds could look like. Keeping them as names and poker chips allows Balatro to keep its focus narrow, rather than giving attention to unnecessary elements that would simply distract from its core idea. Its art style is also core to this. The weird pixelated cards, the wonky Joker designs, the flames burning over the score, even just the flashy effects as each card is triggered, it's almost overwhelming, but it drives home the power of each given poker hand. It's interesting to see a game like Balatro that is so mechanically driven, but also so vibes forward. If you stripped away everything but Balatro's mechanics, I think it would lose an important part of its appeal. The Moorish, snappy gameplay systems are enhanced by this forceful sense of atmosphere. It's like the game celebrates your successes with you, which makes them all the more rewarding and makes me want to just keep coming back for run after run. Though more obvious in narrative or exploration-driven games, I think atmosphere is an important part of any game. Games like Tetris Effect are built around that feeling of losing yourself in the sights and sounds of a game, and that doesn't even need a narrative to do so. This is just some notes on how some games do atmosphere very well, and I'm sure there's more to say about all these games, and different people would find new things to focus on. But what it does showcase is how a number of individually small design decisions come together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. I love losing myself in a game. I love feeling a game's atmosphere, and I would love to see more games take this very focused and intentional approach to atmosphere.